This is the JWN podcast. Shaquille Fontenot is a private chef, recipe developer, educator, and serial entrepreneur specializing in 100% plant-based cuisine and strategic brand growth. One of her companies, FairyFresh Foods, offers private dining, meal prep, and consultation services in Charleston and surrounding areas. Her mission to bring healthy foods to the community expands into all facets of her life, including a sense of activism and community development based on equity, not just equality. This episode was recorded on New Year's Eve as many of us look to leave all that 2020 has done to us behind. We do look back at some of the things that this year has exposed, and I hope the timing and content of this conversation will come to you at a time when we're trying to, reset and improve ourselves. And not only will this give you some ideas on how to improve your diet, but also the knowledge that doing so could improve the world. Here's my conversation with the inspiring and ambitious Shaquille Fontenot. What's by the way, it's Shaquille.
Shaquille.
Mm-hmm. See,
Shaquille. Yep.
It's funny is I've been asking people who are like, oh, do you know this person? And I'll tell you Shaquille, and they're like, no, maybe because I've been pronouncing your name wrong.
Yeah, no worries.
And then Fontenot.
Yep. There you go.
I actually Googled there's a name pronunciation thing. I'm starting this year off. I stumble over my words enough as it is, so now I'm adding in
No, you're good. Literally every day of my life. Thanks, Mom. I think it's because of Shaquille O'Neal. That just was. But yeah, Shaquille.
So that makes sense because on your Instagram it says Quilly.
Quill.
There you go.
Hey,
so
Quill.
now that makes sense. Now I understand. Question one. Yeah. So. I am so excited to have you on here. You have so many different things. I was just discussing with you as we were setting up. I can't even remember how or why I discovered your account. I don't know if it was a referral from someone else. It's not something I talk about a lot. I'm not a preacher on this subject in my life very much. But if I am in the mood to talk about it, I will probably annoy people, is eating a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that might be how I found it. It also could be 2020 is been a very much a year of awakening for a lot of people.
Yep.
And you have been very forward in activism.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes. So let's briefly kind of just go over these things.
Okay.
We could start wherever you want, but I'd like to know
this year.
the plant-based thing. The reason why I asked you on here, I was like, oh, great. We could start the year off. People are thinking about this type of stuff. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times, they'll go to the major outlets or they'll Google it and whatnot. But meanwhile, here's somebody who's a woman-owned business, Black-owned business, putting out plant-based solutions or explain what you do with the FairyFresh.
All right. So FairyFresh has been a little bit of a wild ride. I've always really been into health and wellness in general. So just finding natural remedies for a lot of common ailments. And in terms of, so I have a brand called FairyFresh Foods. And initially we were doing plant-based meal prep in Charleston.
Right.
And we were doing that, I would say we got started in a summer, I would say a good 9-ish months. And then Corona hit. And the world fell apart, and we were like, okay, well, it's time to pivot, and we want to keep ourselves and our clients safe. So we still do some private dining here and there, with all the disinfecting shenanigans in place. But we decided to start focusing on products that people can make at home and make it a little bit more accessible. The reason it started in the first place is because Charleston is home to a lot of food deserts. And now I think new terminology is food apartheid, where it's literally structured that way. It's structured for people to have disadvantages. And so particularly in some low income areas in Charleston. And then it was just really a concern to me that we have all this wealth here. We have all these tourists. We have all this accessibility, but it's only for one group of people. And so that's primarily the reason I started. And I always knew I was going to get moving to that direction. because I dealt with my own health issues. Like it's not a few years ago anymore. It's like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I was teaching in Louisiana in Baton Rouge, and I got super sick. Like,
Whoa.
I'm talking exposed to toxic black mold sick, and I was like fainting randomly, and like my whole body would be covered in hives, and I would like just pass out random places. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, and they thought it was like I was getting tested for like lupus and lymphoma and all this stuff, and they were just injecting me with steroids to try to support my immune system, but that's like only really to calm down the actual symptoms and not get to the root cause. So my family and friends just always come to me when they had a problem to try to get some herbal remedies or think about foods that would heal their bodies. And so I just did a hell of a lot of research. Yeah. And I've always been kind of in tune with the whole naturopathy thing because I have like a maternal grandmother that was super into that as well. So she would grow like catnip and like mint and different things in her yard. And so I learned about a lot of those properties early on, but I never really applied it to myself because I didn't have to until I was like on the brink of death. So started doing a lot of research, explored a plant-based diet, and started seeing the connections between all of our organs and all the vitamins and nutrients we need in plants. And then the biggest thing that people get, the question you get with the plant-based diet is like, well, where do you get your protein? And it's like, well, where do the animals get their protein from? You know,
where does your protein get the protein?
Exactly.
And the sad part is a lot of the animals are getting like some of their vitamins through like supplements.
Injected.
Shots.
Yeah, they're getting shots. They're getting stuff like put into their food.
Because they're raising them in a non-natural situation.
Exactly. So
terrifying cycle.
The thing about me is like, I think a lot of people are more attracted to the type of plant-based lifestyle that I live because it doesn't necessarily mean veganism. So
right. There's a stereotype or there's a stigma when you use the word vegan.
Right.
And unfortunately, and it's tough because it invites judgment or people have a thing in their head when you say that word.
Because you're an unseasoned block of tofu and disappointment. And that's largely what it is at a lot of like restaurants and places where you're presented with these options. And so it's like you have to almost carve out as like a plant-based chef or a plant-based professional, you almost have to carve out like a new reality for people because it's like it's not just what you think it is. And I think for me, I started using the terminology plant-based over veganism because I feel like the term vegan itself has been like not necessarily appropriated, but taken to the level of like it separates people.
Yeah, it's somewhat cultish.
Right, exactly. And it's
and
like
there's warring factions in the
within the community.
If you bring up honey,
right,
it's like you might get murdered by a hardcore, not murdered, but you know what I mean. Well, verbally murder you.
Right. Definitely some online fire going back and forth with these different groups. But for me, it was like, I want to make it as accessible as possible to people because I have a lot of friends, like I have a lot of chef friends and a lot of them are not plant-based, but they see the value of that diet in them. So they are cognizant of where they source their items. Like I know plant-based people that eat seafood, it's just, it really is like the majority of your diet coming from fruits and vegetables, nuts, and just things that directly grow from the earth. You're getting those direct nutrients. So that's really what kind of got me started in that lifestyle.
Yeah. I one of the things I mentioned to you as we were walking in was just kind of, you asked me how I was doing. I was like, man, I had a good night's sleep. Because the full moon effect, I didn't know. I'm 44 years old and I've never really kind of thought about the effects of like the moon cycle on something like sleep, right? But I was thinking this morning about that because I woke up fresh and I was just like, oh, I feel so good. But anyway, I was thinking about like, why is it that for so many things in my life have I ignored about my body? And about 5 years, maybe a little bit more now, I went to a plant-based diet. And since then, I just keep having these kind of realizations. And it's either I've removed a lot of the inflammation, a lot of the dulling of the senses that a normal diet like proposes. Because it happens slowly. You don't know that like parts of your body are like fighting to survive just because of the food you're putting into it. and then you become more in tune. I don't know if that's the case or if it's just because I'm getting older.
I think
I sound like a grandma.
No, it's definitely a combination of those things. So like returning to the moon for a second, it's like so I think we just had a full moon. The night it was the strongest. It was like in the sign of Cancer or whatever. But I always tell people, and this is kind of like wakes them up a little bit. If the moon is able to control the waves and our bodies are mostly water, then you have to think about that from a scientific level. Then obviously you're on some molecular level, you're also being affected by that. And I think that as you kind of become more in tune with yourself, you do clean your body out. A lot of the foods that are like in a standard American diet are really mucus forming, and our body tends to like an alkaline environment. So if you're more acidic, usually your gut health is not in the best place either. And when I say your gut health, I just mean like your digestive health. Like you're able to eliminate whatever you eat. You feel like you have mental clarity when your gut's clogged up. That's where your like intuition comes from. So it's really, there's a connectedness between your body and like the way you're able to navigate in the world. And so it's a combination of like getting older and wiser, but it's also like if you have mental clarity, you're able to make better decisions for your body and, you know, in your general life too.
I think when you clear the path, as far as removing all of that inflammation, that mucus forming stuff, all things that we eat, people are so in love with cheese that even though most people are at some level lactose intolerant, right? Even though they know that they will feel awful later, they still eat it. They still put milk in their coffee, even though they know that like for the rest of the day, they're going to be like, you know what I'm saying? Like they'll just do it. And when you remove that, it opens you up to being more in tune with everything else. So then then you start experiencing things in life, in your environment, and you start realizing how much the weather does affect you and how much like barometric pressure can affect your mood.
Your ankle's hurting and your back's hurting.
And just like you said, because we are made up of water, and we're
made up of star stuff. So like, you
and
know,
we're all, I've been saying this a lot on the podcast lately. I've been getting a little heady, for lack of a better term, but just understanding the connection that we have to everything, even inanimate objects. We're made of the same stuff.
Exactly.
And we're just a bunch of like atoms getting it on. Really. And, you know, to go through life not thinking that all these things affect you. The problem is, like we said with the veganism, is that some of those concepts will get appropriated by groups that feel like elitist you're not part of them.
Yeah, it's almost like an elitism to a certain extent. And I think that it's not something that people do on purpose, but it kind of just fuels all the current societal standards. Like even with, I know we were talking about this new app, Clubhouse, right before we started recording, and it's like, people almost are drawn to exclusivity to a certain extent, and that creates like this holier than thou image when you're like, oh, well, you know, I have to have my leafy greens in the morning, and then, you know, my like herbal tea, you know, and it's not the same for everybody. Everyone doesn't have the same reality. Everyone doesn't have the same routine or even ability to, you know, access certain things. So it
seems expensive for people who, because if you can go to McDonald's and get like a whole meal for like a few dollars,
and a salad's $12, you know what I'm saying?
You go to Verde and you're $15 to $20 into your meal,
exactly,
for one meal, So, but you can do it for less. You can go to the supermarket and buy all the ingredients.
So that's kind of what I focus on. It's like, okay, buy in bulk. These are different things you can make. Keep the cost low. And that's part of what draws people away as well. Well, not even draws them away, but just like repels them completely. Because even some of the more accessible products, they suck. Because if you look at who's making them, it's largely the corporations that are trying to save face. Like I know, like Tyson invested a whole lot of money in like meatless products, and like the dairy industry. A lot of people don't know that the dairy industry is significantly hemorrhaging right now because of all the oat milks, the almond milks, the soy milks. There's so much stuff that's popping up now because people are becoming more cognizant of what they're putting in their bodies. So when we get back into what keeps people from the lifestyle, or not even like becoming a plant-based person, but just incorporating more into your diet. It's scary because if you don't have money, you don't want to waste $6 on a vegan cheese that doesn't melt and is gonna suck, So it's like there's a fear also with like wasting your resources on something that you might not like. And I think if you give people the tools to be able to make things themselves and try something different, or even things that are reminiscent of what they already know, it's easier to help them transition or just even incorporate more into their diet.
I think there's also a danger right now with the popularity of more plant-based options is the like you said, the corporate infrastructure coming in and saying, hey, there's money to be made here, but they need to have these products stay on shelves. So they add the preservatives, they add the sugar, they add the salt, they add all of the oil, they add all of the things that are poison to us.
Right. And if you look at like USDA standards and FDA and all that, like some of the products, you can say that you're 100% natural and literally just be sugar. Like there's so many different nuances in the laws and so many ways that you can, as
and not
a corporate
even sugar,
entity,
by the way. High fructose corn syrup.
Exactly. Not even real sugar. So
we can't even get that right.
It's a constant battle with having to, and that's why people need to be informed about what this stuff is. Like if I'm got red dye number 5 and yellow dye number 3, like what does that mean? Like did this come from a beetle? Like this come from something that's manufactured in house, And
it's very like Yelp just sent an email like randomly to me yesterday or something like that, talking about the restaurants that started in Charleston in 2020. Now, obviously, it's a small number of new restaurants in 2020. I'm amazed that any restaurant tried to open in 2020.
Right.
But two of the eating places, well, I guess, but Blind Tiger.
Yeah, Neon Tiger.
Neon Tiger, I'm sorry. Good, thank you. And the other one is the Cafe of Sweet Abundance, which is in West Ashley, and it's all plant-based, but it's mostly desserts. And the problem I have, I'm like so happy that there's here's vegan or plant-based options for dining, but it's all junk food.
Yeah, and that's something like one of my friends was talking to me about that, and of course, I'm very happy for those that are able to have success during this time. But again, because it's Charleston, you have to be cognizant of the community that you're serving. And do we really need like more burgers and pizza, or do we need some flavorful alternatives? And I think that's an opportunity for you to sit down and think, okay, are there some people that maybe have a platform or don't have a voice that we can uplift and maybe do collaborations with to make sure that it's more of a communal effort than us just assuming that this is, a lot of people in Charleston, when they're starting things, it's like, ching, ching, like you think about the dollar sign and the dollar amount because there is a lot of tourist foot traffic and stuff like that. But for longevity purposes, like, are you fostering that community? Are you being creative, or are you just, is it a gimmick?
Right.
So,
are you just trying to get rich quick scheme thing?
Right. And no shade to these people that are, opening up, but I think you just have to be mindful about it.
Yeah. And my whole struggle trying to explain to people, like, because my wife, for example, she's in real estate. She has somebody that wants to do some business with her that keeps inviting her and me over to their house for dinner. And my wife, she doesn't eat the same way as I do, and she's like very standoffish. She's like, no, and she finally said, my husband's difficult. But she didn't want to come out and say exactly what.
Right.
She just says, oh, he's got dietary restrictions. And I'm like, yeah. But the thing is every time I'm in those situations, I'm a lot less stressed out than she is. Because I know well enough to let people know, like, hey, I eat plant-based, so that means no butter.
Right.
But a lot of times I'll either bring something, or I'll eat beforehand, and I'm just prepared for it. If we're going out to eat somewhere, I have never been in a situation where I can't find something.
Exactly. Even if it's some French fries and a salad, like, everybody knows that the general plate, you just get a drink, French fries and a salad at some places where you can't find something. But I think even that term, like restrictions, it just literally boxes you in. And it's like, when you think about it, most of the stuff, like people who just are diehard meat and potatoes people, like, you don't even really like the meat that you're eating. You like all the flavor, like the herbs and all the salt and pepper. Like you like, the different stuff that you're making it taste good with everything that we eat by itself, which again is not a problem if you're looking at where these things are being sourced. But I say all that to say, I think we really just need to look at the terminology that we use and whether or not it separates people or brings them together, because this year has been so traumatic for a lot of people in so many ways. And we both know that it's not going to just change overnight when the new year hits.
No, people have very wide eyes. They're open.
And that goes back to what you're saying about the awakening. Like, I think the time being forced to sit down and reckon with yourself and reckon with the systems that you're a part of and the things and people that you are aligned or not aligned with. And people can feel that friction, whether or not it's like transitioning. You know when you need to move to a different job. You know when you need to move to a different place. Your body will tell you.
Right.
Like
when it's time.
Your body keeps a score. And so we're getting up every day and like we briefly mentioned it earlier, but it's like, when do you become more aware of what you need? And I think that's really getting back to the root of who you are and like how you can best support yourself. And that's why I like using plant-based in general, because everything is not for everyone, and that's fine.
Right. There are some body types that would not do well on a pure plant-based diet, because historically, if you look in Inuit, they eat fish. Like that's what's available to them.
And you got to look at like from a regional standpoint where people have come from or where they were forced to be, and I think the Mediterranean diet is one of the healthiest.
Right.
And you got to, I was also like, I did a lot of traveling pre-COVID, and it's just really amazing. Like if you go to Peru and you see like 100 different types of potatoes, like we started getting the purple ones here in the Americas, but it's like they have every spectrum, every color, even black potatoes, and then going to Portugal, like on the small islands, the Azores, like they have just so much abundance in their land and their sea, and you can taste the difference in the quality for sure. Obviously, because it's literally directly from farm to table, but it's like the more you get out, the more you're exposed, the more you see what's available to you, the more you start to question, why do I have this, or why is my community or this group of people restricted to these items? And so I know we're talking about like food apartheid earlier, and you got to think, I think Fresh Future Farm in North Charleston, they're like the only farm in that area that has fresh produce that they grow on literally, I don't even know if it's a full acre that they have there. But everywhere else is just like a corner store with some like corn chips and sodas. And it's like, if you literally have $37 in your account, you're not about to go get a salad when you can get a hot dog and some chips for $1. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Like, and the weird thing is those prices for those terrible foods are subsidized by the government. You're like, well, why? Why is milk getting a break? You're poisoning people.
Big milk, big dairy. No, but and that's what you have to look at too. And I think that's why it's not even like physical awakening with people paying more attention to their diets. They're paying more attention to what's going on in their nation. And I think that's even more important, because now we're seeing areas where people have already been disenfranchised for so long, and these problems are exacerbated by everything that's going on with COVID and everything that's going on with all the fights in the government about $600 or $2,000. I'm like, y'all are getting paid upwards of like $150,000 a year to fight over something. Like, it's just nonsensical to me, in that it's something that we have been okay with, the status quo for so long, and now people are waking up. Like even in Charleston, I don't know if it's time to get into this part of it or not.
We can talk. But like, it's a conversation.
In Charleston, Charleston proper, city of Charleston, they allocated $54 million for the police, and less than 1% of the budget, when they already had an $18 million deficit this year, but less than 1% of the budget went to urban and community development or community planning. Right. And you would think that would be like programming, fair housing, things like that. No, it's really just for construction, for some small infrastructure. So it's not benefiting members of the community directly. Honestly, when you look at creating a safe infrastructure for a city, you want to invest in like youth programming. You want to make sure people have the resources so they don't get into the school to prison pipeline or whatever. Well, but I'm like, allocating $54 million to the police and 90% of their time was spent on low-level offenses. It's like, okay, why are we allocating all these resources for people to constantly be harmed?
Why are we keeping that cycle going?
Yeah.
And well, let's get into some of the more controversial ideas of that kind of. Well, they've been around for a long time, but 2020 put up a spotlight on them. One of them that I think suffers from terrible marketing is defund the police. I hate the term defund the police because it makes it sound like, hey, let's just get rid of the police. Which I'm sure there are a lot of people who feel that way, but that's not what defund the police means. I really think they need to just say restructure the police or repurpose the police or reimagine what community policing looks like. Because when you say defund, what you're really trying to say is you're restructuring it. In other words, putting that money, that $54 million, if you were to put that towards community programs, you would have a much more lasting and effective change. You would get rid of the violent crimes and the real crimes that go on. You would minimize all of that because you would be propping up communities and making them care about the communities that they're in and getting rid of all of this cycle of violence that who's it serving? Like, what's the end game? How does that prop up white people to continue to prosecute poorer people or minorities and keep them like kind of down? Like, how does that even help you?
Well, policing is really profitable for.
Is it? Or is it? Well, I guess the prison systems.
Yeah, I mean, it's profitable for those that are service members, and it's profitable for those. It's just a big. We don't have no time today to get into all of that, but
right. It's very.
What I will say is very important to look at the language that we use, and so when people say defund the police, and then literally there was a group, Low Country Action Committee, that was in alignment with the People's Budget Coalition, looking at how to reallocate things in the budget. And the mayor issued a direct statement in response to some of those budget requests saying, we're not going to defund the police. And that language just really kind of jars people sometimes when it's like, you've been defunding education, you've been defunding fair housing. Like, people don't think about that language. So it's more, we like to look at it as like reallocation of funds. Exactly. So how come we reallocate a percentage of these funds to go into the programming and things like this? And then you also have to be careful when you say like community policing versus community control of the police, because community policing is some language that they will, those that are in power will use to further fund the police.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So if you look at community control of the police, that's more of like the police departments having a reckoning. So you're not investigating yourselves. You're not... there are policies in place to have some checks and balances. Because if you have, like Charleston's police department, if you have people that are literally getting government grants and funding, in addition to funding for the city, for militarized weapons, you should never, why do we need that? We don't need it. And so when you look at the line item budgets that are sometimes provided and sometimes not provided and see where these things are going, it's like, okay, y'all are getting new police cars, you're spending millions of dollars on gas, literally patrolling already disenfranchised areas. And it's like these low-level crimes, most people, I just think it's interesting, especially in Charleston, that a lot of these, a lot of the crimes that are being policed are low-level offenses, especially like small marijuana offenses. And it's like every single day there's a new CBD shop opening downtown. So it's like, this is literally the same plant. So why is one community being literally thrown in the back of vans and getting into this system that is very profitable for the state, and the other community is profiting off of this exact same plant? So it's just really interesting when you look at that dichotomy of like Charleston being this adult Disneyland for those that come in, and then for the communities that, you know, literally have been here for generations because they were forced to be here, and they don't have the same opportunities as those who, you know, kind of migrate. So that's just something to look at.
Yeah. And I think what the gist I was getting at, and I think you hit the nail on the head as far as wording, because even I'm choosing words that pop in my head, and it's probably just because I've heard them and I'm not really thoroughly thinking them through.
But that's done very purposefully. And that's why, you know, I'm focusing a lot on political education, both for myself and for members of my community, because that's part of all the jargon. And you look at the tax records and millage and all this stuff. Even like city council meetings, they're extremely boring. They're so boring. A lot of it is just like looking at whether or not you're converting a house into a commercial property. Like they have to go through each one. And that's part of the disjointedness between the community and those that are supposed to represent them. It's not convenient to be represented. You know, you have to go through all these forms, all these different things to have your voice heard. And so unless you mobilize as a people and kind of like, even when we were talking about plant-based stuff, the more people are aware of what's going on, the easier it is for them to form an opinion. If you have 3 or 4 jobs and you're like a single parent or something, you don't even have time to think. You're trying to figure out how you're going to pay your bills and eat. You don't have time to petition the city.
Exhausted.
Exhausted.
You're exhausted. You go through a whole. There are periods of people's lives where they get so used to their comfort level. Right? Even if their comfort level is exhausting. Right. Because they're surviving. Mm-hmm. So breaking out of that is scary. Right. Learning a, kind of Matrix style, taking the pill that is much more uncomfortable, but that's the reality. Mm-hmm. That's the actual reality. It's scary. It's a lot more comforting to just keep doing what you're doing and floating along and just going with the flow. And it definitely is important for people to start having these conversations. And again, the language sometimes puts a stop to the conversation right away because it elicits a response. So the reason why I find, and I know that I'm not 100% correct or fully thought out, but the reason why I find the term defund the police problematic to me is because it puts that stop in the conversation. It automatically divides people into sides. And it's like the conversation should really be like, how do we make the police work for us better instead of work against us? And when I say for us, I mean for everybody, not just for the people that are at the top at the current moment. Mm-hmm.
And I think there is like, reallocate, refund, community control, all this terminology. You don't need the police going to respond to someone having a mental health crisis. Oh, yeah. There's so many different ways that we can create a supportive infrastructure. And I know there's a captain that I'm familiar with in Augusta, and her role is simply to create community programs. So all they do is like give out food, color with kids, play basketball, just like really creating this structure that allows people to come. And it basically takes you back to your community roots. Right. And that's different from like funding. That's different from literally funding state-funded violence. You're looking at these crimes that, like police crimes, police commit crimes as well. And like people don't think about that kind of stuff. And
even the president
commits crimes. Right. But, we don't have to get too far in the weeds on it. But I think it's just very important for people to educate themselves and just not to look straight up at the media and just, take everything at face value because it's a very calculated approach in the information that is given to the people to inform their decisions. And like you're saying, people are so busy, there is just easily digestible content. It's phrases that are repeated over and over again to perpetuate that confusion. Right. Because people don't understand the amount of agency they actually have. And I think we saw it over the summer. We're seeing it now with a lot of different cities mobilizing on a huge level, like the Jacksonvilles and Chicagos of the world that literally have forced their representatives to sit down and reckon with themselves. So. Right. And
I think let's briefly, it doesn't have to be briefly, but let's touch on the events in Charleston when we had the big protest that ended with like a small group of violence, just destruction of property, vandalism. It wasn't really violence against people for the most part. I think there might have been a couple of cases. And the struggle I have, I was there that day during the day, participating in the protest because I marched with my daughter, strongly feel like something needs to be done. We need to be out there. We need to make sure people hear everyone's voices. And I wasn't a witness to any of the stuff that happened later on that night, right? And I really do feel like the response, that like everything that transpired that day was so baffling and so concerning as far as because now when you when you talk to people, and I shouldn't say people, just when you talk to some people now, a lot of people actually, they will refer to it as the Charleston riots. And I was like, I was there. There was no rioting. I think the overwhelming majority of people weren't there to riot. But guess what? We've been told since the 60s that, the fuse is very short and something needs to be done. And not much, a lot has been done, but not nearly enough. And so when these things keep happening, and now we've got it for years now, since Walter Scott, we've got things on video proving that the accounts of this violence are true. And it's still happening. So what if we're a country and another country keeps bombing us and keeps killing our citizens, eventually we're going to war. So to get angry at people for taking it to that violent level, where's their next step? All the peaceful stuff has not been working. The hands across the Ravenel Bridge didn't have the effect we wanted it to. So to go and call it the Charleston riots, I'm like, that's not fair. That's like it should be called the Charleston. Of course, it was going to happen. Of course, it was going to get to that level. And then to me, the tragic part of all of that was the next day when college kids are out in the park protesting, and that's when the police showed up in force and started tear gassing kids. Like, what is going on?
What's going on is just a sheer audacity. There's definitely some unmitigated gall from those that are able to enforce these types of measures. Yeah. I think that Charleston is it's beautiful, but a strange place because, the International African American Museum's opening in 2022, and the research that they're finding now is that like between 60 and 70% of enslaved Africans were imported there. Like that's their first stop. So a lot of them stayed here in the Low Country up and down. Mm-hmm. And there is just so much labor that has been profited off of that is continuing. Like Charleston apologized for slavery, whoop-de-doo. But what have you done to really let's go back to the term reallocate a lot of these funding to support and uplift and to create a more sustainable infrastructure for everyone. Yeah. Like we're below sea level right now. Like we get washed away any day, but the focus is on really, especially with the, what's the name of that? The Visitors Bureau or something like here. Just investing so much funding in supporting the adult Disneyland that we talked to earlier. And it's like, oh my God, you're interrupting my brunch with your marching, and it's like how the lack of cognizance, the lack of reality, like it's like you are in an invisible world. Like you're saying this was bound to happen eventually. Like this is not
the fact that it wasn't worse. Is to me amazing because people don't want to destroy their own. They don't want to place. Not only that, but it's like that just showed that there is a lot of anger. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of turmoil. Like people were fed up. People feel like they don't have a voice, even after the evil. I'm not going to say his name, but those from the Charleston 9 that were murdered in cold blood. And you have clergy members saying that, so, we forgive everyone. And that's not the voice of the people. Like some things are not forgivable. And so you have to look at from the root of all these situations, why does an ecosystem exists that allows this type of situation to happen in the first place. Right. And I think that's when a lot of things are revealed about how many people are under the poverty line in Charleston and how many people have access to things and how many people don't. Right. From an educational standpoint, from a health resources standpoint, mental health. A lot of people that are incarcerated in Charleston were already homeless or don't have anything. They don't have anywhere to go or anything to do. And so you have these pressure points that continue to form and this energy continue to build up. And there's no way besides expressing yourself for this stuff because there's not organization. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's there's a difference between holding a sign and protesting and really thinking about, okay, what's my long-term plan to really
make a difference here. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing, not just in Charleston, but in a lot of cities all over the nation,
Right.
because people are like, we don't have to have this. You know, this doesn't have to be my reality. And I think even like we were saying how COVID kind of exacerbated a lot of things. People already under the poverty line, their lives aren't going to change whether Donald Trump or Joe Biden's president.
Right.
That's not going to happen. So we're looking at how we can get more resources into these communities. We have to look at who was there, why were they there? This is not an isolated event. That's what we're saying. Like,
right.
Of course, Charleston, of course, like it's not an isolated event.
But I love how this all connects to exactly how we started off this conversation, talking about something as simple as your diet, something as being aware of what you're putting into you. The reason why I started this, you just mentioned something that kind of clicked in my head as far as the reason. One of the things I've been exploring in this podcast is the different forms of communication through creativity, and understanding that the experience of people and how they communicate and how they thrive. We're so boxed into like, you know, the education system, which is based on test scores, and you know, it's only a small fraction of the people that excel in that. Whereas people in general have a vast different way of excelling and communicating and offering greatness to this world that never get their feet off the ground, that never get recognized. And I think when we start going into the core level of these things, of reimagining not just government and policing, but reimagining education.
Right.
Because then it all starts to make more sense when we realize, hey, this kid who can't do arithmetic as well as this other kid is amazing at something else.
Right. He could be a tremendous coder. There could be like technical skills that, you know, and I think you're right about everything being connected on that deep of a level. Like we need to, a lot of our problems are rooted in like, I'm going to just say it, the capitalistic structure that we have, because it's always like, it's a me type thing. Like even I was mentioning to you, this might be a good time to get into it. Like I was in corporate for a while, and it was like, it was basically, I worked for like a technology broker. So if you have, just as a quick example, if you or I needed like phone service, we might call Verizon and be like, oh, give us a phone or whatever. Right. But we would work with like the Discovery Channel, and they would need 500 phones or something like that. So it was like mass purchases of technology, and our partners would get paid on those. So I was like in charge of marketing for them, and we would, you know, go to conferences in Vegas and all these Philadelphia, all these different places, and they would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on parties and stuff. And it's like
those
clearly
booths are not cheap.
Right, exactly. And like just it's an escape from your daily life, I guess, the corporate world. But anyway, it just really, after a few years, I was just really taken aback with how much money was wasted, how many resources are actually available. And then I know I briefly mentioned earlier when I was sick, I taught in Louisiana, and I also for a brief time taught in Mississippi. And it's like, when I was in Mississippi, I was like, is this America? Like I really was just thrown for it.
Mississippi is weird.
I was teaching like 5 minutes away from where Emmett Till was murdered, and it was like literally across the railroad tracks, difference, like barren land. Like I know you've seen those aerial shots of like the U.S. Mexico border, and it's like just a complete difference. But I say all that to say, like that really just made me cognizant of how many resources are available. And I think having that experience of like these kids coming to school and they're like the only food they get for the day is the free lunch that they get, you know, and a lot of like public charter schools that are popping up now still get government funding, but they can follow their own rules and infrastructure. And that means a lot of contracts for like transportation or food and things like that. And so a lot of systems are built like that, and it's for profit and not for the actual person. Like it's always profit over people and not people over profit.
Well, that's the capitalism thing. I mean, if you're a publicly traded company, by law, you need to increase your profits every year. You need to make more money.
Yeah.
The thing that I struggle with, being like a middle-aged man at this point, a white middle-aged man who's been in business and run businesses for most of my adult life. But I've worked in the corporate world, except my corporate world looked a little more fun as far as I was working for like MTV networks. And
yeah.
So, but regardless, it's the same thing when you get back, into the offices and whatnot. It's still a corporate structure functioning the same way, wasting tons of money. But there are certain aspects of capitalism, or the American version of capitalism, that I think are not lost. In other words, we're such a big country. We have such a diverse set of needs from the most urban centers to the most rural centers. Very, very different needs, right? Very different political mindsets, very different spiritual mindsets. And how do you herd these cats? You know what I'm saying? It's like there's so many different moving parts, and I do think the American system is kind of on the right track of trying to do it all. But the problem that we're seeing lately is the division of those mindsets and making it so black and white, so yin and yang, instead of like those things existing together, separating them. And the reality is, I think we do best when we come together with opposing views, because diversity really is the most effective way to get progress, because you're going to see things that you might not think of. And I also believe wholeheartedly, from what I've done through my life, is when you're comfortable, as we said before, even in any aspect of your life, the ability to change becomes a lot harder. So when you're hungry, when you're poor, right? When your back's against the wall, that's when you innovate. That's when you come up with things that you're forced into a situation. And so kind of what, and I'm not trying to play devil's advocate. These are just conversations I have in my head where I fight myself. But when you have a capitalist society, we do tend to have these major advances technologically and in certain aspects of life that might have taken a lot longer if it weren't for the devils of capitalism. Because put people's backs against the wall, you can see what that would look like. On the other side, when you look at what the whole world of scientists coming together, not for profit, but for the greater good of humanity, you look at how fast we came up with a vaccine to this coronavirus, how much faster we were able to get this thing created, tested, and starting to be deployed. You go, okay, that is an example of maybe democratic socialism type of mentality, where it's like, yes, we have this desire to make money. We have this desire to stand out and to excel, but we also need to take care of each other.
Right.
And so it's like, I do have faith that America can get this right.
Well, I don't think it'll be on behalf of the government getting it right for us. I think, like you're saying, it's people being cognizant of all that's going on. And of course, we've had tremendous technological advances. But then I would argue that if we have had all these advances, then there's no reason for people to be living below the poverty line.
That's true.
If there's plenty of food for everyone, there's plenty of ways to create educational infrastructure. There's no reason for us to be the greatest nation in the world and still be. There are some nations right now, they're no longer in lockdown. They're living their lives normally.
Fucking New Zealand. Love New Zealand.
Right. But it's just, there's so many areas of opportunity for our growth as a nation. And there's so much talent that we'll never see because you don't have access to these systems. And I would argue that because of capitalism, we have created infrastructure that does allow there to be more power for the actual worker.
Right.
So if we look at when everything got shut down, only essential workers. Why are the essential workers that are the base of our society getting paid the least, the least amount of money? And so when you're looking at it like that, of course, we want these giant technological advances, but why should it be based on exploitation of the most vulnerable groups of people in our nation?
In the world. Not just our nation, but in the world. Because in order for those companies to remain profitable, they have to keep pumping out new stuff.
Let's think of the Amazons of the world who literally will allow stores to come and, post their things and sell on their site. But if they're making more money than Amazon, who doesn't need the money, they will literally buy out that company or, you know, like create their own and put Amazon basics over it, which
nobody I think is freaking out enough about the fact that Amazon now has like deliveries, their own delivery trucks
that they're testing out.
Yeah, but the whole chain is now they're buying up the chain of all the small businesses that were feeding off of them. Like you just said, they start buying them up.
And a lot of people don't know that, you know, there are a lot of legal battles going on with major corporations like Amazon, like Google, on access to information and just like the product sets and different technologies that they're putting out. And I don't think there's a really good infrastructure to monitor that type of stuff. And that's when I always say return to the people and what their needs are. And if you have a corporation where the leader of the corporation has more money than can literally be spent in a lifetime.
Right. When they can't,
is
they're
that
not using
ethical? Is that ethical when your workers don't get breaks when they have to work 18 hours? You know what I'm saying? And so I think maybe we should look at that a little bit more in reforming the structure of these organizations, what they're giving back to society versus taking out of it. And then that would be a new conversation for how we can turn the tide as a nation. Because there's a tremendous amount of work to be done, but the more power you put in the hands of those that actually fuel society, the people, the workers, taking care of them from their healthcare, educational, basic sustenance needs, that's the conversation that I'm ready for America to have, especially when
we've proven
the
we can afford it,
spends like $2 billion a day that's allocated there. And I'm like, why have we been at war for most of my life? Like, that does not make any sense.
It's very scary. I mean, I remember September 11th, my daughter wasn't even a year old. And I remember, well, I was in Manhattan. It took me all day to get home. A lot of walking, yes, just it was a nightmare. Not nearly as bad as the nightmare that other people were living with, but it was just like an emotional, like roller coaster, not even a roller coaster. It was just a free fall emotionally that day. And then to get home and hold my daughter and look at her and go like, I don't know what this world I brought you into is going to be like, because this is messed up. Like, and I, unfortunately, you know, we've never stopped fighting after the events of that.
Well, I mean, that's what, if we could just talk about like the status quo, like you were saying, once you are, I think you said it earlier, I'm probably going to butcher the way you said it, but essentially like if you're used to something every single day, it's harder to change.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how it is as our nation. Like our nation was founded on stolen land and built on the backs of stolen people, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And so you can't really progress from either a capitalistic standpoint or any other structure of the society itself until you address the reason that all the disparities exist in the first place.
Right.
And until you make it a priority to address these things and to actually fuel resources into not creating equality, because that's not going to work. Right. Equity in these, we need more equitable systems, because, you know, I could be 3 steps down and you give me 5 apples, but somebody that already has 10 gets 5. You know, that's not creating an equitable system. So I'm actually really hopeful because of the shift that we're seeing, the Great Awakening, as it is, the age of Aquarius. There's a lot of people that are realizing that they don't have to accept it. Even like one thing that really like shook me up was at the beginning of COVID. They were like, okay, because people didn't know what to do. The government was freaking out. They were like, okay, rent moratoriums, mortgage moratoriums, go get free testing. I'm like, so basically what you're saying is all this stuff existed already. You just chose that not exactly.
And it
free food, free water.
One of the big takeaways from this year on a country level or a global level, but just to watch the failing of our health system in quite a dramatic fashion. Scary. And the fact remains, there are still people, because of language, because of buzzwords, because when you say the word socialism, people freak out and they think there's something wrong with you. But when you look, and they'll attach it to anything. They'll attach it to like, oh, is that water coming out? That's socialist water.
Yeah,
like,
it's so funny. Like going down to Florida and seeing like the billboards, and it was like, no socialism with a giant. It's so funny,
Well,
like just seeing.
but the reality is look at what countries who aren't socialist but have socialized medicine that
Right.
have they take care of their people at the
Well, that's what I'm
basic
saying.
level.
Taking care of their people. So people are now
Yeah.
saying, I'm not taken care of. So why does this government exist? You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah,
so
well, who
now,
are they taking care
right?
of?
Who are they representing? Who are they taking care
Right.
of? And so people like are just seeing it, and they're like, oh no, we're gonna do something about this. So it's really exciting time. I think that everything that we saw over the summer is just the beginning. There's gonna be a great deal of, I don't want to say uproar or hoopla, but we're going to just definitely see some changes. And I think it's necessary for us to have that idealized society that we want. And it's definitely not going to happen in your lifetime, my lifetime, but we can definitely get closer by informing as many people as we can.
And I honestly, this is something that somebody said to me and it clicked and I won't forget it. And it's, it can sound cliche or whatever, but I remember having like kind of like a little moment years ago of just kind of like, I feel like I need to contribute or do more for the world. Right. And this is a guy I worked with at MTV. He said to me, he quoted Michael Jackson. Mm-hmm. And he basically said, if you want to change the world, you got to change yourself.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You got to take care of yourself first. I'm not giving the exact quote, but you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
Man in the mirror. So, that goes back to how the whole reason I want to bring you in here.
It brought it all in full circle.
Because I want people to understand when you start taking care of yourself,
right?
When you start removing the sludge out of your body, mm-hmm. and when you start becoming more in tune and recognize that you have a lot more control over your own body than you know,
in your own life too,
and then you can start branching out.
Right.
Then that river starts flowing out to every aspect of your life, and life becomes a lot more
abundant,
beautiful, mm-hmm. and I'm going to give you a little. I'm going to give you a little backstory on me because I actually want to talk a little bit about you.
Let's do it.
But I'm going to give you a little backstory about my plant-based experience because I got into it for health reasons. Right? Purely for health reasons. But in the back of my head, I always had this influence. One of my favorite bands from a teenager was a vegan mm-hmm. band from Canada, and I grew up in the punk rock scene. So there was always different factions of people with different philosophies on life. And veganism was, that's how I learned about veganism, right? Is through that. And I was just kind of like, okay, those people are weird. You know what I'm saying? Like, but it's there. You learn about it. You know about it. You're aware. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I weighed a lot more. I had let my life, because I was so busy doing everything else, I wasn't taking care of myself at all. And I was about 65 pounds heavier than I am now. And I started to like get scared. I had a couple of situations where I was like, oh no, like something has to change. Mm-hmm. Like my back was up against the wall. And I discovered Dr. Joel Fuhrman. He has a book about whole food, plant-based eating. And so I followed that. And I mean, I lost 60 pounds within 2 months. Wow. It dropped off me. People thought I was sick. Yeah. Like people really thought there was something wrong with me. I was like, no, I just changed my diet and I stuck to it. But what happened, the reason why I'm saying all this, giving this preface, is what happened after, not even that long, but after some time eating that way, the ethical aspect of it started to seep its way into me. And then I started to become like very aware of the pain and the harm that we're causing through our diets. And, I don't know how you got to where you are, but I do feel like when people start to make those changes, you can't help but allow that mm-hmm. love into your heart. Right. It's really sneaky, the lifestyle. Yeah. It really, like you were saying, that kind of happened for me too. So actually tomorrow marks my 10th anniversary of being plant-based, I think. Wow. Yeah. So. And you're very healthy. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I
became a vegetarian, I think in probably like junior, senior year of high school. And then when I went to college, I was trying to get more into veganism, plant-based lifestyle. And I did it for health, purely for health reasons, because I just had so many like immune and inflammatory issues, even when I was growing up and everything. You know, it's harder to control like when you're living at home, what is available to you. If you're like a broke kid, like you can't just go out and just buy, you know, whatever you want. But when you get to school and you have this giant salad bar with like 50 different toppings, you can experiment, you can try new stuff. And that's really a culinary awakening for a lot of people when they leave home, is like trying new stuff that they, you know, they wouldn't normally. But for me, the community that finds you, you know, you were saying you read books, and I followed this girl named Fully Raw Christina. I'm not at that point now. I can't do the Fully Raw live. Okay. I need my like pastas and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But she would just talk about like how good it was for animals. And then I was always kind of very in tune vibrationally with like, you know, I'm a pretty mindful person. So I do my meditation. Like I need to be doing my yoga because I'm a little crunchy right now.
This year's been,
right? Like,
that's a struggle for me.
It's a struggle. But like everything really makes sense. And we were talking about earlier how we're all made of star stuff, and how like even the mics here, like this room we're in is pretty cool right now. It's a lot of technology in here, but you wouldn't want to sleep in here because like all the currents coming through the ports will really affect, you know, your sleep. Like even having your phone really close to your face at night will throw it off a little bit. But like starting to think about what you're putting in your body. If these animals are literally cramped into space, injected with stuff, scared and like angry and upset right before they die, and you're eating that, like that vibrationally transfers to you as well. And so that from an ethical standpoint of like the emotional well-being of animals, I was never like a tree hugger, plant-based person. I really didn't care about PETA, no offense, PETA, and all those, you know, other organizations. But as I became more cognizant, I was like, oh, it kind of makes sense.
And you stop
and then you think about, or you think about like the environmental effects too. And you start reading facts about cows and all the methane. You're like, oh shit, like we're destroying the earth because we're farming cows, and we could just be feeding people like rice and beans, you know?
Yeah.
And even like all that, like you were saying, this is an advantage of having the technology of a capitalistic society, is that now they're inventing all this new stuff as alternatives to that. So that's cool too. But
there's a benefit to it. There's also a curse to it, but the greater benefit
from a technological standpoint. So there's like a lot of from a metaphysical standpoint where you're jumping to this lifestyle, you're just picking up on all other, like people do like you'll see hashtags on Instagram that'll be like vegan for health, vegan for life, vegan for animals, vegan for the environment, vegan for everything. So it's like once you're in it, you just start seeing the connections between everything else. And I think a lot of people that do change their diet become more radicalized because their mindset, their life, everything is shifted. And so it's like everything that I've known as ordinary is actually something that they just told me was to, and I think that's also like not necessarily a suppression technique, but it's convenient for you to be uninformed. It's really beneficial for the powers that be for you not to know how certain things work, including your body, including your body. So
there's a sadness when the discomfort of your existence becomes the comfort, because our bodies are just designed to be comfortable. We're designed to protect ourselves.
And it's scary to change.
And if you're constantly in a state of discomfort, and that's how your body identifies its level of comfort, coming out of that, it sounds crazy. It sounds like woo kind of thing. Yeah. But coming out of being miserable, your body is rejecting that.
Right. And then even the process of like eliminating a lot of things when you have been eating a certain diet for so long, it's scary because you might have inflammatory reactions. Your body's like, they call it like a Herxheimer reaction when you're detoxing, or like your body, I call it recursing. For me, like I'm still seeing
people who do keto call it like the keto flu. When they remove the sugar, they feel flu-like symptoms because their body is addicted to sugar.
And it's literally your body holds like both physical and mental trauma in different areas in your body. So like me, all the stuff that I went through in Louisiana about like 6 months ago and 2 years ago, I had a really, really bad reaction at a time that I was detoxing. And it was like all the areas that I had problems with years ago. So your body keeps the scores. It is very like there's a lot of memory in your body.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so it remembers how you treat yourself. And so if you think about what we were talking about, that comfort level, it's hard for your mind to break out of those patterns to help your body move along. Because your body's always feeling it. But your mind's like, I'll start on Monday,
Right.
And right now I'm kind of like in the middle of a cleanse. And my partner is like, yeah, let's start now. And I was like, well, I want to do some french fries before we started.
It's the, I don't know if you ever smoked cigarettes in your life, but that's the quitting smoking mentality is like, all right, this is my last pack. Instead of just throwing the pack away, you're like,
why waste it? Like I got some chips in there. But no, I think that is really a gift to yourself when you start becoming more cognizant. And like we were saying, it doesn't have to be an expensive process. No. It doesn't have to be a cold turkey type situation. Like I know when I was first vegetarian, not even like completely, because I don't eat dairy now, but not even completely plant-based. I decided it was going to be like the start of that year I was going to start. And this is when I was still in school. My mom had some baby back ribs that she was making, and it was like literally cooking, and the clock struck 12, and that's my only regret, that I didn't get to eat those ribs before even now, like the smell of bacon is just like, it's just a beautiful smell to me. But also when from an ethical standpoint, I'm just like, let that little piggy live, and I can just put some liquid smoke in.
Well, I mean, and to address the ethical standpoint, I think for people who it is beneficial for them to eat animal-based products. There's something to be said about the ethical responsibility, and it's admirable to a lot of people who are hunters. And I say that and I'm not even being like, I know people around here who hunt. They get excited every hunting season, and that meat will last them all year round.
Yeah, my dad always has like deer jerky, and like, so that's, people are always confused because like I have a pretty good bit of culinary experience. And so when I was learning how to do a lot, I still had to cook meat. When I was in high school, when I had jobs in college, like working at Chili's, I was making bacon ranch chicken quesadillas and, like different things like that. And it's like, that's why I think I have a different perspective too, because I surround myself with a community that understands me and I understand their needs as well. So it's like, if someone comes to me and they're like, oh, do you have an alternative to X, Y, and Z? I might be like, okay, well, if you're transitioning, maybe try, some ground turkey or some, like I'm really cognizant of, I meet people where they are. Like, I'm not gonna hold up a sign and throw red paint on you. Like, that's just not who I am. And I know because like, I haven't always been the person that I am. So it's like, if you have a question, I'm going to answer it. But if it's a stupid question, which there are some, there's Google available to you. Like I have, it's laborious sometimes when you think about training people up in the way that they should go. Because like I said, everybody has a different path. So all I can do is provide the resources and let you know what's been successful for me. And if you want to try it, that might open up tremendous new avenues for you to figure out how you want to live your life.
And and honestly, when people start at that level, paying attention, it's the seed has been planted. And hopefully they start examining the rest of their lives and going, well, if that was such a drastic, wonderful improvement, not only to my life, but to the world, right? And you start to recognize the improvement to the world. And then, you start looking at your relationships with people. You start looking at your structures of how everything works.
Right. Then, what you will and will not accept for yourself. Because for me, we were talking a little bit about self-employment, entrepreneurship. That's part of it too. It's like your mental health really affects your ability to pay attention to your physical health. Right. And for me, if I'm stuck in like a system or a place where I'm trying to enact change and the structures that have been created don't want that to happen, I can't exist in that space. So I had to carve out my own spaces, and that's scary. That's super scary. Like, and it's definitely not a lifestyle for everyone. But I will say that there is something for everyone. Right. So like, if your job is not working out for you, and it's literally like, I know, sorry for anybody listening that might know, but my last position, I literally would go to work early just to sit in the parking lot and like hype myself up to walk in the office because I was just so anxious. And like that, going back to gut health, like, your body releases chemicals in response to stress. And that happens over and over again. Like your body has that memory. You're not going to be able to, like, if you're not eating all day because you're stressed out and you're stuck at your computer and you're answering emails and stuff like that, and you don't eat until like 8 o'clock that day. Like your body isn't remembering all this. It likes patterns. It likes routines. It likes being taken care of. You're basically like a plant with more complex emotions, essentially.
But again, starting small, those small changes have huge impacts.
Right.
And people shouldn't be afraid that, hey, if I try this, I might turn into like somebody completely different. No. Don't confuse that. What I'm saying is it opens the doors to and if that's the outcome, great. If it's not, whatever. But even if you just make that one little change in your life, whether it's the way you're eating, the way you treat other people, anything you do, your work ethic, where you're working, where you're spending your time. You have a very limited time on this planet. If you're showing up to work and you're sitting in the parking lot trying to get the courage to go in,
you might not need to be there.
It's time. Your body is literally yelling at you
like
to
you're
change.
Forcing yourself.
So don't ignore those things. I had a similar situation. I was driving up to a client, and I was dreading it. And I talked to my wife about it, and I was like, I think I need to start culling some clients that if I'm pulling up to somebody and I'm feeling dread to go in and deal with whatever it is, and it's nothing life changing as far as what I'm doing, but I'm like, oh, maybe I need to change some stuff here.
I think it's really important that you mention your wife. Shout out to her. But it's important to have that community, because if you're kind of like dealing and mulling over these things in your head over and over again, no matter what it is, like that can get you in a cycle in itself. And so it's really like healthy if it's not necessarily having a partner. It could be your friend or like, a team member or something that you feel, or even like member. Writing it out. Like really just, you need to chunk out these thoughts and figure out it's not necessarily like an examination of if you're overreacting or not. It's an examination of like if you're creating worry about a problem or if it's a real problem. And having that clarity really helps you so much, because you can, if somebody's like, oh yeah, you're totally right. Like, not necessarily that you need validation, but it's important to have like that sounding board almost. And that might help you jumpstart the confidence to do what you need to do. And I think not only with like us talking about how our clients, our jobs sucked at the time, or not even that they sucked, it just wasn't for us.
Right.
Like that's just not something that we aligned with, right?
Giving you messages.
And that's why when we came full circle with everything, but it's so important for me to foster that community. And that's why I made that pivot from just like making food to giving people the tools to make it themselves, or even like when we're talking about like activism work, you can't be a celebrity activist. You just can't. No. I don't care how many podcasts you have. I don't care like what your platform is. You have to build a community. You have to understand the needs of that community. And that's the only way that you can change on any level. It's like addressing it and then working out how we're going to deal with this now. Right. And there's a lot of power in, I think, that.
Well, let me ask you a question about when you kind of, when was there a thing that happened in your life? Because obviously your experience through your life living all throughout the South is a lot different than mine. Was there a turning point for you that opened your eyes in a certain way? Like was there an event or a thing that happened to you personally that said, I'm going to make this change in my life, or I'm going to get involved in this way?
Well, I mean, I feel like I've always been a bit of a rebel, like a radical person in general. Just the way that I was schooled, the people that I was around as I was younger. Obviously, there were the deaths of a lot of young Black men when I was in college, and that's when we really started, doing more protests and sit-ins, and I guess they called them like die-ins. We just lay on the ground and stuff like that. But I really started. When I became an educator, I looked at the disparities on a deeper level, like why these systems exist, why they happen in the first place. I got involved with an organization called LEE, which is a Leadership for Educational Equity. And that kind of started showing me where resources were allocated and like how systems and things were set up. So beyond the trauma of Blackness and just kind of constantly being exposed to deaths, and then those not being, let me just say this, they were definitely legally addressed because the laws were in place that kind of allowed them to happen and the response to happen in the way that they were. But I think that it was just a combination of things over time that really just led me to
kind of chipped away at you.
Right. Yeah. Led me to question why this was happening. And then when I was house hunting a couple of years ago in Park Circle, we were there with the realtor and looking in the house, and the realtor just stepped away for a moment. So we're like looking outside, looking in the windows, you know, and this old man calls the police on us. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I would say like 5 or 6 officers showed up. We were literally in the house at this point, checking out the house, opened the door. They have guns drawn, pointed at us, hiding behind trees, like, get on the ground, get on the ground. Me and one of my friends were there. And that was like the most fairly recent encounter that I've had. And I was just like, the only reason I think that it wasn't worse than it was is because a neighbor from across the street came across and he was like, what are you doing there with those girls? They were just there with the realtor. Like, what are you doing? And the officer's like, you need to back up, sir, and things like that. So we were just basically detained for like 30 minutes where they try to figure out what's going on. They're calling the realtor, they're calling the homeowners, all these shenanigans. And I was like, that just showed me, that particular incident, that I was not welcome in that community. Like, I didn't belong to these things. It was so strange that a young, like, because I look like a kid most of the time. Like, I look cute today, all the audience listeners. I usually just look like a young ragamuffin.
I'll take a picture.
You know? And so it just really just showed. I was like, why do you have 6 officers coming out to, because this one old man called and said, you know, he thought we were breaking into the house, and we were literally looking at the house to purchase the house.
Okay.
So it was like, that really just made me think, like, what the hell, like, really what was going on here? And I think it shook me up a bit after that. And I was like, you know, it made me pay attention to different areas of my life, like we were saying, and like, okay, what? No. And then I decided to...
the fact that you didn't run away screaming from just the whole state is amazing. I had a not similar situation, but on the other end of the spectrum. When I moved here, I guess 16 years ago, I almost was just like, because I was very timid about moving. I grew up in New York, you know, so my misconception or preconception or whatever of the South was very like, what the hell? But I was married to a woman who grew up in the South.
Where's your wife from?
She's from South Carolina. She was going to Clemson when I met her.
Oh, that's okay. Me too. I went there.
She's going to love you now. She's very hardcore into her Clemson. But she, you know, we were looking at a house, and one of the houses that we pulled up to, the real estate agent that we had said, he pulls us aside. He's like, listen, before we go in this house, I just want you to know that this house is being sold by colored people.
Oh my goodness.
And I looked at my wife.
Oh my God.
I looked at my wife and I was like, I was speechless. I was speechless. And then I had to have this conversation. I'm like, I don't know if I can live down here.
That's crazy.
I don't know if I can do that. And then I realized it was just one dumb guy from, you know, he lived in Mount Pleasant. I don't even think he's a real estate agent anymore.
I wonder why.
But I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's insane.
Fuck. Like, honestly, what? Like, when you like to think like, oh, these are like white people, I can talk to them on this level.
No, but that's interesting because it's like the way that it was phrased is just almost like, yeah, you know, the roof's leaking, but it's like it was presented as a problem, and that's a major issue. Like, I was reading a story like over the summer about this lady, and it was like a mixed race family, and they had pictures on the wall of their family members, and their house got praised at a higher value when they took the pictures down. Like, you know what I'm saying? I was like, this is absolutely insane. But that kind of goes back to a lot of historical structures that are in place as well, and about like what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. And that's why I'm like, I'm still here because I'm supposed to be here for various reasons, but also I can't run away from a problem. Like,
you can't,
it's opportunities like this where you have a chance to like amplify these stories and to make people more like. There's a lot of good old boy systems in Charleston, but there's so much cultural richness that, you know, can really create the equitable systems that we're talking about, but also like draw attention to the fact that it's not always peachy keen.
Right.
You know, a little Southern phrase for y'all, but like, that's just wild for real. But,
well, it's definitely less, I don't know. Maybe it's just as offensive, just on a completely different scale than having the cops called on you just for looking at a house.
Yeah, that was kind of crazy. Like, I didn't know if I was going to live or die that day.
Well, that's see. All right, you brought up something. I know we're kind of shooting off into different places, but and it's one of the things I think 2020. It's been the spotlight has been shown for years now. I think it became extremely loud in 2020, the difference between being a white person getting pulled over by the police and being a black person getting pulled over by the police. Right. For a white person, you're thinking, how can I get out of this ticket? Or how I got someplace to be. Can we just get this moved along? For a black person, you're thinking, am I going to die?
Yeah, I have like in Charleston. Yeah, I've gotten pulled over a couple of times in Charleston. One was like, I was using my GPS to get to a friend's house a couple of years ago. And like the GPS just turned me down the wrong street. And they were like 3 cops pulled up. They're like, this is the one way. And I was like, my GPS, like, yeah. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. No problem. Like, and then like, I'm literally like trembling. I'm trembling. And he was like, it's okay. It's okay. We're not all bad. And I'm like, the fact that you even have to say that in the first place is a major issue, you know? And I've had several like different experiences where I have been really shaken up by seeing blue lights or seeing somebody rush by. And that's like, part of the trauma that we're talking about, like, is something that chips away at you. It's like over time, and it's also generational. This might be getting way too far off topic, but I've been doing a lot of research lately and seeing how long trauma is stored. Like trauma is stored for generations. They've like done a lot of tests on rats and different things and seen this as a fact. And when you think about the burdens that your ancestors had to bear, and the fact that you're still experiencing a lot of those in the form of an actual aggression and microaggression. So you have like all this historical stuff to deal with and all the stuff in the current context. And then obviously the future too, if you decide to bring anyone into the world. But it's like, how do you reconcile all that in your daily life? And it goes back to being kind to yourself, taking care of yourself, because you cannot change yourself or anything or anyone else unless you really understand what your own needs are. And a lot of times those needs reflect the needs of your immediate community as well. And so how can we create more communal structures and more opportunities to not be like, oh shit, we don't know if she was going to get killed by the police, to, okay, how could there have been a different response to that situation so that it doesn't happen to someone else in the future? Right.
Yeah. It's a long... drawn
it's
out.
Arduous, but
but the commitment needs to be there for. And I think, I mean, am I being naive in thinking that more and more people, as time has gone on, I would say for me personally, not knowing that these problems have existed, but seeing it with the tape from Walter Scott, seeing that had such a profound effect on me, because there's always this. I grew up when I was very, very young. My first memories, I grew up in New York in the projects, right? And what I would experience being the only like white kids in the projects, what I experienced, what my early experience was, well, number one, I didn't know that we were the only white kids. You know what I'm saying? Like, who cares when you're a little kid? But you when people have a relationship with authority, with police, where everything they say to the police is a lie because they don't trust the police, as you get older, you're like, well, whatever they're saying about the police is a lie. You have that in the back of your head because that was my experience. And I'm not faulting the people in that community for having that experience. They were doing that as a survival mechanism, which I didn't recognize at the time. So when I saw the videotape of what happened, and you can't deny what happened, no matter how hard you try, no matter how many internet sleuth friggin' neo-Nazi wackos try to find fault or try to find a loophole in what that tape is. What that tape depicts is black and white. It's there for you to see. You can't deny it. And when you see that, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh no, this problem actually, that's the problem. That's the real thing. I feel like 2020, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, everybody else, the countless amount of people that we don't remember their names.
Right.
I feel like hopefully the more that the spotlight is shown on those, the more people will open their eyes and recognize, hey, this is deeper than what just happened. This goes back so far.
Right. And I think
it's going to be a long process to heal.
Right. And I think we can use a lot of those historical examples. I'm hoping that we won't have new examples to uplift, how our nation is set up. But they also say, I think there's an advantage to this new technological society that we have, how easy it is to whip out your iPhone 12 and record a situation. I think that's a way to be an ally. That's a way to, create this narrative. So our smartphones have given us the ability to become documentarians of our actual experience. And I think the more that we can draw attention to everything that's going on, like you said, there will be some massive shifts in consciousness in general. The phrase "the revolution will not be televised." It had nothing to do with our devices. It's a mental revolution.
Right.
It's a reckoning. I said this like 4 times during this podcast, but it's like a reckoning with yourself. It's seeing the systems, it's seeing the patterns, it's seeing the interconnectedness of everything. And I think the people are ready for it. Yeah. So it's gonna be crazy, but it'll be fun.
I'm gonna tie this all up in a bow because I think we've hammered the point home. Is that if you want to change the world, you got to change yourself, and you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to really do some digging to find out what works for you. And you got to stop lying to yourself. And that will help you see the rest of the world in a better light, and also make the changes, those micro changes that will contribute to the greater good. And it's undeniably going to all come down to love for everybody, everything, love for our differences, love. I think the everything that you're fighting for is wonderful and beautiful, and I'm so happy that you came on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's awesome. I really, really appreciated the conversation, and it's revealed a lot to me too, because we talked about a lot the power of language, and it's an opportunity for me to kind of go back and review my notes and think about how you can make things more accessible to people and articulate it in a new way. But yeah, it definitely starts with you. But you can't have an individualistic mindset either. Right. You have to remember that you are an extension of everyone who came before you and everyone that will come after you. So I'm loving it.
The language is tough. The language is tough because I say the wrong thing constantly. I'm always misspeaking. Because I think I've realized over the years that my language probably works best when it comes through like something like music or art. So when I use words, I will say the words that I've heard in the past, and I'll repeat them. And sometimes, you have to examine that. There's a lot of self-examination that has to happen.
So excited. This is fun.
It's so much fun. Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely.
Before you get going, don't forget to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. And also, you can check out more at jwnpod.com or follow me on Instagram at JoeLatex. That's at JOEL8X. Have a great day. Peace!